Okay, I think we're live. So hey everyone, I'm John, I'm here with Liam, and we're gonna do our video chat discussion post here. In case somebody wants to use the same method we're using Google Hangouts and YouTube. If you go to YouTube, you can live stream a conversation with someone else. So I went in and set up a live stream and then invited Liam, and we're broadcasting this straight to YouTube. I don't think anyone is watching live, but it saves your posts and then you can send the link out so that people can watch it afterwards. So here we are, live chatting, discussion board 3, fairness and testing.
Nice.
Okay, so the first point, what is your reaction to the readings? Do you agree or disagree with Knoster and Owl? What do you think, Liam?
I thought it was a really good chapter. I think, you know, just as teachers, we're probably aware of some of these things, but to have it, you know, in text and to give names and thoughts to some of these ideas that we need to be careful of when we're, you know, right through the classroom and then into testing, I think it's a good idea. You know, we have to have an appreciation of background knowledge. You know, I mean, all the talk of formative assessment is a lot of it will help assess background knowledge and, you know, in a way, see if the students have learned the objectives and are ready for a test. But, you know, things like that are vital in order for, you know, everybody to be on a level playing field.
Right, and I think a big point that goes unappreciated has to do with writing skills. You know, a lot of tests, you ask a biology related question, but you're testing their writing skills, their reading comprehension, as well as their content knowledge. So it's something that I've never really thought about taking a test. Is this really assessing what it's supposed to? But it's something interesting to consider.
Yeah, I mean, as science teachers as well, it's funny, like we do have to teach, you know, there's a lot of vocabulary in there. Then there's people need to be able to read tables and stuff, and you might take that for granted. I mean, I know I do, and I need to be cognizant of that. You know, and then there's mathematics that we teach as well, you know, and certainly in some chemistry classes, there's kids who are, you know, the algebra makes things difficult, or, you know, working with exponents, a hateful one of mine. You know, you need to make sure that people are, again, on a level playing field.
So as far as the article goes, it really ties into what I discussed a lot in our week 1 discussion post about the cons of standardized testing. And one of the points I discussed in my post was that they're not as objective and meritocracy based as they're meant to be. Not only do they test reading comprehension skills, but there's studies that show that they put students from low-income homes, students of minority backgrounds at a disadvantage. And so Knoster and Owl, they summarize evidence suggesting that standardized tests actually resegregate schools by channeling certain students into the basic level classes and other students into the high level classes based on their test scores, which aren't as objective and unbiased as they're supposed to be.
I mean, I thought it seemed like a throwback even to the stuff we did in the first course, a lot of the psychology. Like there's so many things that are out there that we need to try and be aware of and work around. And, you know, I think you can't be in a classroom these days without people saying that, you know, that standardized testing isn't a fair game. You know, and I would subscribe to that, even though I didn't in the first post. But they're just so important because, again, despite the appreciation that they mightn't be the same for everybody or, you know, be equal for everybody, it's the be all and end all when decisions are being made. It's like they're saying, you know, parents coming in, they're just checking how test grades are going. Administrators and boards and states are all working off these too, and it shows where money goes and where teachers go, and if it's not right, it just compounds the issue.
Right, and that stresses the importance of this particular module. If standardized testing is that important, but it's not fair at this time, how can we fix it and make those tests more fair? One of the most interesting things I read in that article, they said, I think it was 60% of the variance of scores are determined by the out of classroom factors, whereas 20% was in class. So if your family's income is a better predictor of your test score than your GPA or your in-class test scores, then clearly something needs to be changed there.
You know, it's always, you hear these talks, even though it's a little political, but about people having to pull themselves up by the bootstraps. But, you know, the people who are saying that, the chances are they had a fairly solid background, you know, in a family sense. They probably weren't hungry all the time. And, you know, like again, in the psychology, we learned of, is it Maslow's hierarchy? You know, and if you're sleeping and you don't have to worry about food and being warm when you're at home, you can concentrate on being the best you. Yeah, so it's funny. And as well, then when weak schools or whatever are identified, you know, they're being pushed in the wrong way, like they say, narrowing curriculum just to get test scores. And that's not necessarily the broad education we'd like people to be getting.
Right. So I'd say all factors considered, I'd agree with the authors. I think they made a sound point about standardized test scores not being objective, about it not being a true meritocracy. And yeah, I can see how they would definitely lead to the resegregation of schools by channeling certain kids to certain schools because the test scores there are better and the parents feel that their students will be better prepared if they go to those schools.
Yeah, and it just keeps going then. Like if students are in a school where, you know, they know the scores aren't great, and, you know, how are they supposed to be motivated and, you know, have purpose as such and vision of where they're going when, you know, people around them aren't, or, you know, the last 10 years they've been bottom of the state, or, you know, so yeah, there certainly is a lot of work to be done in that sort of area.
Yeah, and I think there was an article from the first module about self-fulfilling prophecies in standardized testing, and that's exactly what you just said. If these kids are taught or told constantly that they're not smart enough, that they're not going to get the test scores they need, it's going to come true one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so the second point, have you encountered testing bias? We talked a little bit before we started streaming, and we're two of the lucky ones, pretty advantaged. So that I could think of. But when I was reading through the chapter, there was one example Macmillan used that stood out to me. It was just a made-up quote. If I had known the test would cover this, I would have studied it.
Right.
And you get a little bit of this at the college level. You know, I had a professor that would say, "Oh, don't worry about memorizing the numbers on this graph. It's the trend that's important." And then you get to the test and the number shows up and you're like, that's kind of unfair. But at the end of the day, it didn't seem like a big deal. You just study harder next time. That's probably the only example I can think of.
Yeah, it's funny though as well. You can, you know, again, being the lucky few, but that could knock somebody off stride in an exam. You know, you don't just kind of swallow that up and move on, or, you know, so things like that, you know, that Macmillan talks about in the chapter. But yeah, I mean, I think we have probably got strong academic backgrounds, you know, so the enabling behaviors that are spoken about, we have a decent level of that, and our test taking skills were likely, you know, average or above average at least. So, you know, we're lucky that we didn't have these things, disabilities. But, you know, there's a strong case made in the chapter then that just to be aware of these things, you know, again, it's in teaching, you just have to worry, like, you probably surround yourselves with friends and have conversations with people who are on a level field with you, and you don't, you know, you got to look out for that appreciation that we're maybe top 20% or something. So there's 80% of people with different stories to us. And yeah, so got to be appreciative of those to make a fair classroom and fair assessment.
Right. The only other example I could think of is when not all of the material in a unit gets covered, but it ends up on the test, which probably happens for standardized testing all the time, especially like the biology HSAs. You try to get through all the material, you've got 1 week left and realize you're not going to make it in time. So you kind of rush through it, which isn't fair. But I think it's hard to prevent that, especially in something like biology where there's so much content and you want to do labs, you want to do projects, but that deadline is always approaching.
And you think then to the schools that are mentioned in Nostra and Au's article, then when, you know, there are a few kids who are genuinely trying, but If it's a disruptive classroom all the time, you're not going to get through. You don't have that proper opportunity of learning, and the handbrake is on as such. When you're trying to get through these things. Yeah. All right.
Okay, so our last point, how can we ensure fairness in our test construction for this week? So for our assignment, I made a couple points. The one that was pointed out in the chapter was keeping the learning objectives in mind. So whatever topic we end up choosing, tie every question back to the learning objectives, because that's what the students have in their syllabus. That's what we've decided are the most important pieces of information, the most important skills. So always go back to those so that the tests are streamlined and fair. It's just like tying your discussion post back to your thesis statement. You want to keep on track and don't veer off on a tangent.
Yeah, and I mean, I know that I tend to get frustrated when I don't feel like I have a clear idea of what's going to happen. So, I can certainly appreciate that too in the classroom. So saying this is what we're going to try and learn, and the questions are going to be aspects of this, and seeing that you can apply this knowledge. And I think it's only fair. It's like you say, that example you had from college, that's not a position people want to find themselves in. Differentiating questions too, again, just to make sure that people who mightn't be strong in one particular area don't pay entirely with a test grade because of that. So having a wide range of different things, be they short answer and multiple choice and essay, tied in together.
And with essay questions, one of the tips in the chapter was to keep the scoring pretty specific. Don't make really open-ended questions. Instead of saying, tell me about mitosis, students can go anywhere with that. Make more specific questions and then grading criteria so that the students don't all go off in different areas and they end up losing points for something silly that they didn't know they had to include.
Yeah, it's funny too, because that, I'm grading a fair amount all the time, but I looked at tests today and there was, the first kind of long question was butchered by one kid. And, I was like, who is this? But at that point, I have decisions kind of already made in my head a little bit. It's very hard to be unbiased after that, despite I try not to look at the test names first, but, we're naturally influenced a little bit by these things just as human beings. So to try and cut that out as much as possible. And again, the rubric is one of the big things there.
And along that lines, making the rubric available if you do have something more open-ended like an essay, it should never be a surprise or a secret how you're going to grade a test. So letting them know ahead of time, hey, it's going to be 25 multiple choice, then you'll have an essay. I want you to touch upon ABC. That way they know how to prepare and they feel like they're being tested on what they studied and what they learned in class.
Yeah, and the amount of kids who are going to come in and, you hear them all the time saying that I'm not good at tests, but, to get them, it's going to be an important part, whether we like it or not, for many years. So to try and get them a little bit more comfortable and not have that defeatist attitude, even before they start, and hopefully that'll lead to more motivation and hopefully mastery.
Okay, I don't think there's anything we missed. Maybe avoiding overly complicated or wordy questions. Try to keep it straight and to the point. That's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, again, at the last little bit of that chapter, there's just that little checklist. It puts the headings that it spoke about. And again, it might seem that, oh, well, we can't possibly suit everybody. But again, there's those nice broad checklist to cover, and if you do that every time, or if that's in their mind when you're setting exams and things, it will be a better place to take assessment.
Okay, yeah, I think we've covered everything. It's nice talking to you as usual.
Perfect, John. I much appreciate you setting that all up for me, and thank you very much.
Yeah, hopefully it works. Don't thank me yet. Let's wait till we we get it posted.
Fair, okay. Checks in the mail.
All right, have a good one.
Take care. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks for watching.